Good morning, everybody. Constitutional conservative candidate for Wisconsin Supreme Court, Justice Daniel Kelly, is our very special guest today, Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. For DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden, and we are streaming today's show live on our DrydenWire's Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. So however you may be watching, welcome and thank you for joining us. Special thank you to some of our recent guests, including Attorney Adam Jarkow, Judge Jennifer Doro, Congressman Tom Tiffany, and of course, Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald, who joined me yesterday for our 128th episode of Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fitzy. You can watch those in a recording of all of our previous live shows on our website at DrydenWire.com, on our Facebook page, or on YouTube. But today, we're chatting with constitutional conservative candidate for Wisconsin Supreme Court, Justice Daniel Kelly. Dan, good morning, sir.
Well, good morning, Ben. Thanks so much for having me on your show again.
Oh, man. So you were on like 3 months ago. It was right after the election.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Actually, yeah, right before we went live, I had said, I wonder, I don't know how many people were really paying attention to the Supreme Court race back in November. The general election just finished. You were on like a week after that. I think there's a lot of burnout from that, right? It's like, I don't want to think about another race, and that's next year. So I figured maybe, because we don't ever have an agenda for these shows. Your campaign didn't say, hey, talk about this, and we didn't tell them what we're talking about, because honestly, I never know what we're going to talk about. That's why I love these shows. But maybe we should start with just a kind of a recap bullet point for people who may now be paying attention to this race when they weren't in November. Tell everyone a little bit about you.
Yeah, so thanks so much for that opportunity. And I think that back in November, it wouldn't have made any sense at all for people to be paying attention to this. I mean, they're busy with the really important things in life, the things that make for a rich and rewarding and full life: faith, family, friends, work, community, all those things. And so I know that takes up our days. And then, when we get near elections, Wisconsinites are savvy folks, and eventually they'll turn their attention to the elections, make sure they take care of business.
Agreed.
So a little bit about me. Of course, I've had the just tremendous honor of serving as one of the Wisconsinites Supreme Court justices for 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. And I have to say, it was the greatest professional honor of a lifetime. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But I hasten to add that qualifier, professional honor of a lifetime, is really important, because the greatest honor was the fact that beyond all reason, my wife agreed to marry me. And so that always has to rank first.
It has to.
It's one of the great mysteries of life. So it is, but the reason that this was an honor was partly because of how I understand the work of the court to function. So, all of the authority to create and maintain governments belongs to we the people, right? It says it right in the preamble to our Constitution. And that authority, the people of Wisconsin, they never give it away. They don't sell it. They don't alienate it in any other way. They simply loan it. And so all the authority that I exercised on the Supreme Court did not belong to me. It didn't even belong to the office. It belonged to the people of Wisconsin. And that sets up a really important relationship between them and the people who serve in government. And it's the relationship of boss and servant. And so every day that I went into chambers, I went in as a servant. And so all of that work I did was with my bosses in mind. And as it turns out, Ben, I had the greatest bosses a guy could ask for. So that made it an honor, but it was also a joy. So I still remember when I was going through the appointment process back in 2016, a good friend pulled me aside one day, and he says, "Now, Dan, are you sure you want to do this?" And I looked at him like, "I think so."
Yeah. Well, I thought so, but now maybe I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And he says, "Well, if you're appointed, here's what your days are going to look like. You're going to go into chambers, and you're going to be there all day long, all by yourself, and all you're going to be doing is reading and researching and writing." I'm like, "Uh-huh." That sounds like heaven to me.
Sounds terrible.
So, so it was not only an honor to serve in that capacity, it was a joy every single day. I just loved what I was doing. So, and that's kind of what has brought me to this point. Over the last couple of years, as I've been traveling around the state of Wisconsin, I've been doing a lot of presentations on the proper role and function of our court in a constitutional system. And when I'm done, I've just had an enormous number of people that would come up to me and say, "Look, we want to make sure that our next Supreme Court justice is someone that we don't gamble with. We want to know that that person has a track record of constitutional conservatism, and they told me they see that in me, and so they've asked me to run." So,
Well, that is an advantage. Well, I would think it would be, or maybe a disadvantage, depending on how you look at it, that you have over, all three of the others that are going to be on the ballot on February. Well, jeepers, that's next Tuesday. Holy cow! It's like,
yeah,
jeepers, 6 days from now. Is that they can go back and look, here's what I've done.
yeah,
And here's the conclusions that I've had. And, if you like it, great.
yeah,
Vote for me. If you didn't like it, might want to vote for somebody else. But that is kind of do you
exactly.
look at that as an advantage or a disadvantage for you?
Oh, total advantage. So, when I wrote the opinions that I did for the court, whether it was a majority opinion, a concurring opinion, or a dissenting opinion, I did that all with the idea in mind that I'm writing a report to my bosses on how I used their authority in deciding that case.
Oh,
And so, you might, I don't know if you've taken a look recently, but I have all the opinions that I wrote listed on my website, justicedanielkelly.com. That's
what?
justicedanielkelly.com. So under the record tab, you'll find a list of all the opinions that I wrote. And I wrote them in a way that you don't have to have a legal background to really grasp what we're doing. So I think it's important for a jurist to write those opinions in a way that all of his bosses are able to access them easily, and so I think that's a huge advantage because people can see exactly what I have done as I've served them on their Supreme Court.
All right.
And
So it was under record?
yeah, there's a
Judicial
little
record.
tab at the top.
I just went to your website right now, Wisconsin. How about that? Let's pick one of these to give,
Yeah.
because that is an advantage. So if we had, like we did have Jennifer on last week, but obviously we couldn't talk about this because she hasn't been,
Right.
on the Supreme Court. It's not, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Mhm.
Walk us through what that looks like for people who don't know. When I'm assuming we call it a case, right? Or something gets presented to the Supreme Court to look into and make a ruling on. If you want to use just like generalities or pick one of these cases that you've done and use that as your example, walk us through when you get it to how you then get to your conclusion. I think that's what it's called, right? Your conclusion,
Yeah.
whether it's,
Yeah.
okay. Walk us through one of these things, a typical case.
Right. So let's take one that people might have some familiarity with. So Ben, I'm assuming that you remember back to the COVID era. I'm trying to forget it, but during the COVID era, we had that lockdown order. It was the Safer at Home order issued by Secretary Palm of the Department of Human Services, and she shut down the state. Right, went into her Madison office one day, sat down at her keyboard, tapped out what turns out to be a brand new law. Shut down all the businesses unless she decided that you were in an essential business, told people they couldn't send their children to school, told you couldn't go to church, and went into amazing detail about how to conduct your everyday life, including how to cough and sneeze. So that order came to the court for review because there was a challenge to its legality. And the court decided on a 4-3 decision that it was not a lawful order. Now, I think I found that remarkable that it was a 4-3.
That always blows my mind. It feels like
Yeah.
it should either be like 7-0 or 6-1. Like maybe one person is.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm sorry.
It should have been
That's weird.
7-0. Yeah. And, I mean, it was not one of the more difficult cases that we had encountered. So the opinion of the court was that the order was unlawful because the secretary didn't go through the rule promulgation process. And that's true, she didn't, and it was unlawful because of that reason. But Justice Rebecca Bradley and I, we saw that that really only scratched the surface of the problem. The real problem was that it was unconstitutional. And so I wrote a concurring opinion, and you can go through that and you can see exactly how I analyze and decide cases. So you start with the law that's applicable to the case, whether it's a constitutional provision, statutory, regulatory, or common law, and then you use rigorous logic to move from those premises all the way to the conclusion. When you're done, you should be able to look back and see an unbroken chain of logic connecting the conclusion to the premises. And if you can do that, then that is your guarantee that the conclusion is commanded by law rather than an individual jurist's personal views or personal values. And so that's the methodology that I brought to every single case, because as I look at the Constitution, I see that the people of Wisconsin have told us, those of us in the judiciary, they say we've got one job for you. It's just one thing. We want you to pay attention. We want you to do it well, but it's just one thing. And that is to use existing law to decide our cases. They tell us that they're not interested in whether we think it's a good law or a bad law, wise or unwise, effective or not. They tell us they have an entirely different branch of government to address those questions.
Come to find out,
the legislature.
There's another one.
Yeah. Go talk to them.
Yeah.
And they say, look, we hire you to just do this one thing.
Just one job. You have one job. Just
one
do
job.
that.
And do it well.
Yeah. And someone had asked me yesterday, when I was on the phone with someone, and how do you look at things? And, we had, again, Jennifer on, you've been on, and now, of course, you're on today. I don't know the other two. They didn't ask to come on. Otherwise, we certainly would have said yes. I don't know. I just don't understand. What you were just saying is almost exactly what I had said, is that just do one. I don't care if the person is a conservative or if they're a liberal. I literally don't care, because it really shouldn't matter. Like, I don't care where Dan Kelly stands on abortion. Right. I know you're a man of faith, but I don't care about if you think marijuana should be legal. None of that stuff. I don't care about that stuff.
Exactly.
Just, we have a constitution. Just do that. That's it. I don't understand why we can't just do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're not interested in us second guessing the laws that they've had their legislators pass. So you're absolutely right, Ben. Whether a person is politically liberal or politically conservative, it makes no difference to what you're supposed to do on the court. The only question is, are you willing to set aside your politics, and do you know how to do that in a reliable, consistent way? And that's why I developed that methodology of analyzing, deciding cases, and writing the opinions. Because if you do that, it squeezes out all of your personal values in politics. And
it should, right? And again, I know you're a man of faith. So out of curiosity, so for someone that maybe doesn't know anything about you, we all have. I think we had Will Martin on. Well, he's been on a few times. And by the way, that dude's just an outstanding human being.
He's
all the way around. That dude is awesome.
Yeah.
And he was on one time, and we were talking something along these lines, not Supreme Court related, certainly. This was like last year, summertime. And he was saying, listen, we all have biases. We do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't deny that. Don't say, well, I'm unbiased. No, you aren't.
Right.
You certainly are. Yeah. But it's about being aware of it, because as soon as you're aware of it, then you can be conscious of it. If you're conscious of it, then it's okay. Now I know how to remove this, because I know I could be biased on this. So how do you? Are there times where you something was presented to you and you're looking, and of course you're going to have an immediate, your own personal opinion.
Right.
How do you separate those two? Is it, okay, come on, Dan, don't let your personal feelings get involved in this one. Is it difficult? How do you go through that process?
Yeah. So you're right about this. The first thing is you have to understand that you have views and preferences in politics, and just like every other normal human being. I mean, it's not like you come to the court and there's a surgical removal of your political beliefs. They're still there. The question is whether you're willing to set them aside, and if you know how to set them aside effectively. And that's why I developed that methodology, because I recognize I walk into the courtroom and I am a fully formed human being, and with all of the interests and biases and preferences and all of those things that any other person would bring with them wherever they go. So as you walk in, you have to concentrate, right? It's not something that is second nature. You do have to concentrate on this, and it has to be intentional. And that's why I think it's so very important to have a methodology of addressing this. Because if you just leave it to sitting down at your desk and going, okay, today I'm going to try really hard. I don't want to let my preferences influence the way I do the work. If that's the extent, you'll fail, and you'll fail on a fairly regular basis. So the importance of the methodology that I described is that logic does not care about your politics. It doesn't care about your personal values. It is simply the logical progression from the premises, which are the law applicable to the case, all the way down to the conclusion.
Sure.
And then when you get done, you've got to go back and you got to double check it. You got to make sure there are no breaks in that logic that connect the conclusion and the premises. And then if you, having done that, then you have your colleagues look at it and you ask them to see if they find any breaks in the logic. And in this process, it is a methodology that will squeeze out your politics, will squeeze out any biases that you bring, and will result in an opinion that is an accurate representation of what the law commands.
We have, so Sue Nash actually has something on here. It says, but you advertise yourself as a conservative. And that actually is a good observation in terms of what we're talking about. What I had said, I don't care, conservative, liberal, it shouldn't really matter. But at the same time, it clearly does. And you do say, well, I'm a conservative. So why is that something that, well, that's just what you kind of have to do when you're running a race? You have to say you're conservative. No. Why is that?
So I identify myself as a constitutional conservative. And there is a world of difference between that and a political conservative. So a constitutional conservative is concerned with conserving the original public meaning of our Constitution. And so that ropes in that entire body of scholarship that goes into discerning what the law commands and then applying that faithfully without respect to your politics. Now, it might be that we could come up with a better term, but for better or for worse, this is the terminology that is developed over the years to describe this approach to the work of the court. So, and like I said, that is entirely distinct from political conservatives. You could be politically liberal and be a constitutional conservative.
Yeah, we probably should just have a different word because everyone's going to associate one with the other.
Right.
Or I should say they won't even necessarily see that there's a difference there.
Right.
So when you go,
I've been trying to move over the years that I've been involved in advancing the principles of constitutional conservatism. I've been trying to move the language in a particular direction so that we can eventually get away from that. So originally, this body of thought was referred to as judicial conservatism, but that didn't make a whole lot of sense as a term, because conserving the judiciary is kind of like, well, okay, yes, we still have a judiciary.
Sure.
The question is, what are you doing in it? And so conserving is an important aspect of what we do. We are conserving the terms of the Constitution unless and until the people of Wisconsin change them. And then we conserve those terms of our Constitution. So I think the term conservatism in relation to constitutionalism is instructive because it tells us what we are conserving. So now, eventually, I think it would be helpful to simply move to I'm a constitutionalist, right? And maybe that's the way where we need to get to as a term. So we're moving the language, I think, in the direction that it needs to be to accurately describe what we're doing and to make sure that people are not mistaking that for political conservatism.
Yeah, because first of all, I kind of feel like if that would be the term that people would use, and it's not a political conservatism, but if it is just constitutionalist, I kind of feel like everyone should run as that.
Yes, me too.
Duh, that kind of makes sense. So I actually I lied at the very beginning when I said I didn't write anything down. I absolutely wrote one thing down. I was doing our updates for our U.S. and world headline links and Wisconsin headline links this morning. I do it every morning between 6 and 7, so it's on our website. So I was looking across Wisconsin news outlets today, and I put in like the previews of like the 5 biggest stories or things that are happening in Wisconsin. And I came across one with your name on it. And it's from WPR. So I'm like, oh, first of all, it was a brilliant headline. And the headline was, Daniel Kelly wants to be most boring Wisconsin Supreme Court justice, which great headline. And it looked like it was an interview. I didn't get a chance to actually read through it, but I wanted to ask you about that. Are you happy with that moniker? Are you happy with this? When you saw that, I'm sure you had seen it. When you saw it, was it, oh man, you're killing me, Wisconsin Public Radio? Or is it, nope, I totally own that?
Yeah, so I actually have not seen it yet.
Okay.
And I love it. I love it. So, and my campaign hates it when I say this. But here's the thing.
I suppose.
Well,
like they'll go out and put it on your website to vote Dan Kelly. He wants to be the most. So, yeah, I totally get it from a campaign standpoint.
Yeah, but, I'd be perfectly happy if we put that on my campaign website. Because here's the thing. So the court is not supposed to be an exciting place. Certainly not the Supreme Court, right? At the trial court, you've got the drama shows we see on TV. A Few Good Men. We saw that in the theaters,
Sure.
And it's all very dramatic. And you've got phenomenal actor on the witness stand yelling, "You can't handle the truth," and it's all very exciting. At the Supreme Court, nothing like that ever happens. It is the work of the court. If you put a TV camera in there, it would look like a guy sitting behind a desk with a big fat book in front of him. And he's turning the page every once in a while. And then he jots down some notes, turns the page, and he sits and he thinks, writes down a few more notes, and he starts writing an opinion. And then that's it.
And you want to do this job?
I love this job. I love it.
Sounds terrible.
So this is joy to me. I love every moment of serving as a Supreme Court justice because all you do is you read, you research, and you write. Sure. And that is heaven to me. So here's the thing. So the court is not supposed to be an exciting place like the...
And he's out. My goodness. All right. Well, thankfully I told him in the event that something happens, actually, that looks like not an internet thing. I think like his power went out or something. Oh, never mind. I think he might be back. There you are.
Are we here?
Yeah.
All right. So I was so boring, the app on my computer fell asleep.
Yeah.
So I'm doing it right.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So the idea is that all the really exciting stuff, the policy development, all that kind of stuff, that happens in the legislature. So the work of the court is exactly the same every single day. We take the work that the legislature's already done, and we use that to decide the case that's in front of us. And you know what we do the next day? We take the existing law and we use it to decide the case in front of us. And then the next day, we do the exact same thing.
I'm sensing a pattern here.
So one of my superpowers is the ability to be boring.
Well, as we just noticed, our program even said, "Ugh, we're just turning it off."
Yeah, exactly. And that is, and honestly, in my view, that's what people should be looking for in a Supreme Court justice. Yeah. Someone who doesn't go into chambers with the idea, I got to find something exciting to do today. I want to mix up the law or create it or amend it or ignore it. That's not for us to do. And I think the people of Wisconsin should be looking for a guy that will go into chambers and be perfectly content doing the same thing day after day ad infinitum.
In your history, have you ever been a circuit court judge?
I have not.
Okay.
I went right to the Supreme Court.
Attaboy. I was just curious because I think you're all three of your opponents or that are going to be on the ballot, I think are all right. I think
they're all circuit court judges.
Right.
Yeah.
if you were to, I don't know, like give advice to them, or to, if somebody asked you, like, what's kind of the difference between, or maybe there isn't a difference between a circuit court judge and a Supreme Court justice, because you have the advantage of having been a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
What are like some of the challenges? Like if you were going to advise someone, hey, you're a circuit court judge, but I've been a Supreme Court justice, and is it a world of difference, or it's kind of just the same thing, just that more people have eyes on it, but it's pretty much the same thing.
It's a world of difference. So at the trial court, you have an enormous docket of cases that you're working through. And so you're looking at the pleadings, considering them for sufficiency. You're conducting trials. If it's in a criminal court, you're taking pleas, you're doing sentencing, and it all has to happen on a pretty quick turnaround. You really don't have a lot of time to study the law deeply. So in the Supreme Court, it's exactly the opposite. So we don't do any trials in the Supreme Court. All we do is, like I described, you're sitting in chambers, you're reading, you're researching, you're writing. Every once in a while, we come out and we have oral arguments. It's not a trial. It's just the members of the court and the parties having a discussion about what the law requires in that case. And so as a consequence, we focus really deeply on the foundations, on the bones of the law. And our responsibility is to research that so thoroughly that we are confident not only that we have discerned the meaning, but we stand in a long line of prior jurists who have looked at the same kind of issues, and to the extent that we can, we decide them in the same way. But then and this is really where the research and the knowledge of constitutional principles really becomes a premium. You have to be able to discern when the court's line of cases starts to diverge from what the Constitution requires. So a good example of that would actually be, and it's one of the cases we highlighted on my website, was Tetra Tech versus Department of Revenue. And in that case, we considered a doctrine the Supreme Court had developed over a period of about 80 years. And what had happened is, in the process of reviewing decisions of executive branch agencies, or very gradually over a long period of time, the court had worked itself into a position where it would simply defer to the executive branch agency's conclusions of law. So we were allowing the executive branch to do part of the judiciary's job. And so that question was presented to us in Tetra Tech. And so I wrote the opinion, the lead opinion in that case. And I went back and I saw how the court's cases gradually, little by little, incrementally over the years, led us into error, to the point where we'd allowed some of the authority the people of Wisconsin had placed in the judiciary, we'd allowed that to migrate over to the executive branch. And so in a what might be an excessively long opinion, I think that turned out to be about 80 pages or so, I traced out the error that we had created a little by little. But the importance was we always go back to the Constitution as the plumb line, and we compare our line of cases to that plumb line. And if we start veering off course, our responsibility as a court is to come back to that plumb line. And that's what we did in Tetra Tech. And so that's the kind of really deep foundational research and consideration that the Supreme Court does that a trial court does not, just because it's a functional matter. They've got a lot of cases. I mean, one of probably the best illustration of this was a good friend who, right out of law school, clerked for a federal trial judge, and the judge had asked him to research a point of law. So he went and he did some of the research, and and after a period of time came in, gave an interim report to the judge on what he discovered. And in describing it, says, now, there are all of these other areas that that I think I need to research. And at one point, the judge looked at him and said, we're a trial court. We got to load and fire. We got a bunch of cases that are waiting for our attention, and we just can't afford the time to do the exhaustive research on every single question that comes before a trial
Mm.
judge. And that's one of the things that distinguishes trial judges from Supreme Court justices. We necessarily take the time to do the exhaustive research because once we get done, there's no one else to check our work. So not even the
right.
United States Supreme Court checks our work on questions of state law. The United States Supreme Court can only look at federal law. But as far as what our state constitution requires, as far as what our state statutes and regulations and common law require, that question ends with the Supreme Court. And so we need to make sure that we do that exhaustive research and consideration to make sure we get it exactly right.
Well, maybe that's why a couple of months ago I'd asked about 25, 30, 35 people, just randomly, not on a website or anything, just people I know. And I asked them, do you know how many Supreme Court justices we have in Wisconsin? And the second question was, how many can you name? And interestingly enough, almost half people did not get the correct number right of 7. It was anywhere from 5 to 9 to 11.
Yeah.
And then I think only one person could name more than 3.
Okay.
And at first I thought maybe that's a bad thing, but I wonder if maybe that's isn't necessarily a bad thing, and depending on how you look at it. But it seems as though this is something that it's kind of, as you were mentioning, this isn't a lot of fame, a lot of glamour. It's not a movie. Everything works very slowly. If you know all of our names, maybe that's not necessarily a good thing.
Exactly. Yes. So as far as I'm aware, there's never been a movie made about the Supreme Court.
It'd be pretty boring. You would love it,
right? Yes. So let me tell you a little story on this. So a number of years ago, when I was on the bench, my daughter was attending college. And someone had stolen her purse, her ID, along with her ID and all of that. And so we reported it to the police. And they were doing their investigation, and we came up with some new information. So I accompanied my daughter to the police station, and we met the detective who was assigned to the case. And I was impressed that there was a detective assigned to the case. And he says, "Well, we think we know who it was." And so he went through a description, and when he's done, I said, "Well, I'm actually kind of relieved that, if that is the person, I'm kind of relieved by that, because I was afraid that perhaps someone had targeted my daughter because of who I am." And the detective looked at me and he says, and who are you? And I started laughing. I'm like, well, I told him. And he's like, "Oh, my God, I can't believe I'm a police officer. And I didn't know who you were. You're a Supreme Court justice." And I'm like, look, to me, that's a sign that you are leading a really good, rewarding, rich life that you would not know who the Supreme Court justices are. So I'm not concerned about that at all. And it does really go back to the role of the court is to be as boring as possible. If you're in the headlines, you might be doing something wrong. So that's the role of the court. We use the work that others have already done. We use that to decide our cases. So there should never be any surprises coming out of the court. Just the same thing every single day.
You had mentioned, we've talked about that you have all of your opinions and all your cases on your website, so people can kind of go through that. When you go, I know you were just here up in our area in Northwest Wisconsin. You were just in Sawyer County, I think in Hayward on last Saturday. So when you go to places like that and you talk to other people, has it ever come up where it's they said, "Well, why should I vote for you?" Do you ever just kind of want to say, "Well, did you vote for me last time?" "Yep." "Did you like everything I did when I was on the Supreme Court?" "Yep." "Okay, so what's the problem?"
Yeah.
Do you ever just kind of want to say that?
Yeah, I mean, and that really is when people ask me, "So, what would you like to say to us about this race?" I almost always start with, "Well, it was the greatest professional honor of a lifetime to serve you as one of your Supreme Court justices." And then I invite them to look at the work that I did on their behalf and to make a judgment on whether they believe that I did a good job. And if I did, I invite them to support me and to vote for me sometime before February 21st. And, and if they disapprove, then I say, well, look, we've got, there are 3 other candidates and you can choose from one of them. Now, fortunately, and this might be self-selection, but so far, at least, I haven't run into anybody that says that they disapprove of the work that I've done. So I've been very gratified as I travel around the state that they say, yes, you were a good, boring justice. You just used the law to decide our cases. And that was
You're
it.
so
And that's what we're
boring. I
looking
guess I'll
for.
vote for you.
Yes.
Talk about real quick, because we're only about 10 minutes left here. Endorsements. Obviously, this is a non-partisan race. So are endorsements important in this race? If you get one, or if one of your 3 opponents has one, you're like, no, I really wanted that one. Do they really matter that much? And maybe I'll even just ask you right now, kind of a follow-up to that already is, have you had any that you are just particularly, I wouldn't say proud, I think I wrote down, especially meaningful to you?
Yeah, and I think endorsements play a particular role, especially if if you don't have experience on the Supreme Court already. Endorsements are really important because that's a way in which a candidate can come to the people of Wisconsin and say, "This is not just me saying this. There are others who look at me and see." A potential Supreme Court justice as well. Once you've done the job, once you've been there, endorsements are significantly less important because now the question is, well, what have you done on the court? What is your record? Can we look at it and determine if we approve of the way you've handled the authority that we've loaned to you? And so for me, endorsements are not particularly significant because I've already served in that capacity. And the best endorsement is the work that I've already done. Now, having said that, I will say that there are 2 endorsements that I find particularly important because they come from fellow jurists. And so I think there are 2 just absolute rock star constitutional conservatives in our judiciary today. One of them is Justice Rebecca Bradley on the Supreme Court, and the other is Judge Shelley Grogan on the Court of Appeals. And both of them have endorsed me. They took a close look at the records of all 4 candidates, and both of their conclusion was that I am the only proven constitutional conservative in the race. And I think that is an incredibly important endorsement because it reflects, it says something about me as a jurist, and then draws a distinction with the other candidates in the field.
Are there any, maybe there have been, I don't know if Marquette Law has already done one or something. Has there been any polling out about this? Like, how do you know right now? We have 6 days left to the election, to the February 21st, the primary election. Do you know where you are? Do you have internal polling? And if so, it's internal, so you probably wouldn't want to share that. But do you know or have any idea? It's like, I could be 4th out of everyone. I have no idea right now. Or do you have an inclination?
So here's the one exciting part about this. I have no idea. We've not done any polling. Polling is insanely expensive to do, and so we've just been concentrating on reaching out to our fellow Wisconsinites, and who knows? Tuesday comes. I might come in first. I might come in 4th. I might come in somewhere in between. And I'll look forward to seeing what it is, along with everyone else in the state of Wisconsin. But here's the thing: in one of the and thank you, Shelley Ann. I really appreciate that. I saw that. Can everybody else see that, Ben? Or are they just thinking I've just lost my train of thought?
No, they can all see it.
Okay,
I should have probably told you that before we started the show. That I'll put some of the comments up on the screen.
So I think what I've told people around the state of Wisconsin, I always end my presentations with 2 requests. And the first is that they look really carefully at the records of all 4 candidates, and then use their judgment to decide who they want sitting on their court. Because I have there are a couple of metrics that I look at as I think are important. So I think having a proven public record of constitutional conservatism. I think that's important, and I'm the only candidate in the race who has that.
That is a fact.
And then I think it's important that you are ready and able to take the argument to the activists, because we've got a general election that starts a week from today, and then we already have 3 activists on the court. So it's going to be important that you are able to bring that argument to the court for the next 10 years to make sure that the activists don't deform the work of the court. So I think that's an important element. And then I think electability is important. And so, I've demonstrated already that I can attract nearly 700,000 votes. And in a year in which there's no presidential primary, that's a walk-away win. And I'm the only person in the race who's demonstrated the ability to get that number of votes. And Ben, before I decided to run for this seat, I checked the calendar really carefully, and I discovered that there are no presidential primaries anywhere in sight.
Hey, that's good news for you.
That's very good news. So,
Yeah.
So anyway, I think my estimation is on those three metrics, I'm best positioned to win both on Tuesday and then on April 4th. But here's the key: my estimation is completely and totally irrelevant. It's the analysis and the judgment of the people of Wisconsin that counts. And that's why I invite them to look carefully at the background of all 4 candidates and then make their judgment. And that's an enormous amount of power that they have to decide who sits on that court. But as I learned from Spider-Man movies, with great power comes great responsibility. Yes. And so that's the responsibility of our fellow Wisconsinites.
Well, I liked you before. I found out yesterday, or actually last week, Adam Jarko was filling in for Sheriff Fitzgerald on our show, and he announced during the show that he had endorsed you. I'm like, well, I liked Dan before, but now I don't. Because if Adam's supporting you, then...
Well, you do what you can. And, what are you going to do?
So there was one more thing I just thought of, and I don't usually like to bring up another person said this about you, but it does seem a little relevant because a couple of people have asked me about this week, and that was when Judge Dorrit was on last week. She had mentioned that she had endorsed, or she had announced that she was going to, if she loses and you win, she's 100% behind you, but my opponent, which in this case that'd be you, or conservative primary opponent, whatever, has not made that same commitment. Maybe something has changed. Have you? And if not, what is the reasoning for that?
Right. So what I've told Jennifer, and I've told her many times, is that I would be, if she makes it through the primary, I would be very happy to endorse her if she can show me what she means when she says she's a judicial conservative. So I don't do blind endorsements. An endorsement is a vouching for someone. Right? So someone comes along and says that they're X, and then an endorsement is someone else saying, yes, my considered opinion is that person is X. And so Jennifer's running as a judicial conservative, and she is insisting and almost demanding that I endorse her if she comes out of the primary. And first off, I'm a little flummoxed by this idea that we've moved away from the concept of earning an endorsement. And now there are people demanding endorsements. Sure. I'm not going to be demanded. And the reason for this is because when I tell Wisconsinites something, they believe me when I tell them. And I learned this when I endorsed Brian Hagedorn. So when Brian came to me and looked for my endorsement, all I knew about him was what he said about himself. He didn't have a proven public record of constitutional conservatism when he ran for the Supreme Court. But I took him at his word. I gambled. Maybe others did as well. I endorsed him. I campaigned for him, helped him get to the Supreme Court. And then when he got there, we discovered that when he says he's a constitutional conservative, he apparently means something very different from what I say. So, I mentioned that Wisconsin legislature versus Palm case, and that was a 4-3 decision. Well, Brian was one of the 3. And he was one of the 3 because he looked at that order that was essentially legislation. And he says that he didn't see any problem at all with the secretary reaching over, grabbing the legislature's authority, and using that in the executive branch. Well, that's a really significant problem because that violates the very heart and structure of our Constitution, what the framers understood to be the very protection of our liberties, and he just blew right through that. And he did it again in a subsequent case a little bit later on. And in a separate opinion, he wrote that he wasn't sure that the separation of powers, the very heart of our Constitution, was a legally enforceable command in the Constitution. And that is just shocking. So after that, I decided I would not do any more blind endorsements.
That makes sense.
I would need, I just want to see something. So with Jennifer, what I have is the same thing I had with Brian. What they say about themselves, and the only difference here is that we have Jennifer's campaign literature, and you've seen these flyers, right? I mean, this is all candidates do them, and I know that all candidates, all people in Wisconsin do the same thing with those flyers that I do. You glance at them as you're walking over to the garbage can, and you drop them in, and there are probably hundreds of thousands of people around Wisconsin who've done the exact same thing with the literature that we send out. They glance at it real quick and then they're done. So I get it. I've done it myself. So, but as a consequence, we know that we get maybe 10 to 30 seconds of attention on those flyers. And so we put on there the things that we think are the most important things for people to know about our candidacy. Mm-hmm. And so as I read Jennifer's, I see that she says that she is deeply respectful of the rights that our state and federal constitutions have endowed on our citizens. And I look at that, I'm like, wait a minute, do you hear anything wrong in that? I mean, where do our rights come from? I mean, they come from God, right? I mean, the Declaration of Independence, one of the greatest political documents ever written, says, and you know how this goes, yep. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. Amongst these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and governments are created to protect those rights. So Jennifer's literature says our rights come from governments, but our Declaration of Independence says they come from our Creator. Or maybe you prefer the formulation in our Wisconsin Constitution. So the very first sentence in our Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, says that we are all born equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights. And amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted to protect those rights. So it's the same idea. Rights exist first. Governments are created to protect those rights. And so, when Jennifer's demanding that I endorse her, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this.
Sure.
I have what she says about herself and her campaign literature that says that she's not getting the very first lesson of constitutional law correctly.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. We went a little over, and that's fine, right? I mean,
right.
This is just great. So I want to make sure that if there's anything else that you wanted to make sure that we talked about today that we didn't get a chance to, please go right ahead.
Well, let's see. We didn't talk about fishing in the beautiful lakes of the North Woods, but we can do that over the summer.
Okay. All right. What do you have coming up this weekend? You have 6 days left. Has everyone pretty much already made up their mind which way they're going, do you think? And what do you do for the next 6 days? Do you hit it hard, or is it, man, that's it, I'm just staying home this weekend?
Yeah, I've got a little bit of gas left in the tank. So we're gonna hit it hard all the way through Tuesday. And, like I said, I mean, the people of Wisconsin, they've got the really important things in life that they're paying attention to: faith and family and friends and work and community and all that sort of thing. And so they will turn their attention to this. And for each one of them, it's going to be at a different time as the higher priorities give way to this. So we want to make sure that we're talking to all of them all the way through Tuesday. So our days are packed from now until next week. And so I'll be spending all my days spending my words. I have a certain number of words that I can speak in a day, Ben.
I think you just use most of them.
I use them up. Sometimes I use them up like 2:00 in the afternoon. I gotta keep pushing.
Yeah, I forgot this morning. I did one of those sample ballots. I can't remember what it's called. Like I just Googled what's on my ballot, Wisconsin, and I think that's what it is. Wisconsin, what's on my ballot.org or something like that. I don't want to send people to the wrong place, and I put in my address, and just to see what the order was going to be, and I assume that's the official order that it's going to be, but I don't know. It's a sample ballot, and it looks like it was Judge Janet. We'll just say Janet. It was first in the order, then you, then Everett Mitchell, then Jennifer Doyle, then of course the write-in. And I actually didn't know how they determined this, so I went to the WC's website, and it said that unlike partisan general elections, candidates in a nonpartisan race names appear on the ballot is determined by drawing of lots. So you're second on it. Is that also something that you look at, or maybe your campaign, maybe they care more about it than you do, where you see, okay, where am I? Because it doesn't say Republican next to it. It doesn't say constitutional conservatives next to it. It's just the names. So does that matter? Not matter, but does anyone look at that and go, all right, we're one of the first two, that's good, or does it not matter?
I don't think it matters. I mean, there are people that will study things like that, like they study tea leaves. But I'm not looking at tea leaves to determine how this is going to come out. So I have no idea if it matters at all. You're welcome, Renee, and thank you for your note. That's most kind. I just want folks, to take a little time to think about the four candidates, and then come to their considered judgment. And I'll stand by their judgment, whatever that might be. And if they move me along to the general election, I will consider that a terrific honor. And if they decide otherwise, I will respect that judgment. It would be disappointing, but I will respect that judgment because I know the importance of having all of this authority in the hands of the good people of Wisconsin. So all I'm doing over the next week is what I've done over the last several months, is going out and talking with the good folks of Wisconsin and telling them what I stand for, the Constitution, the rule of law, and a supremely boring Supreme Court.
You're a good man, Dan. It's an absolute pleasure having you on. And regardless what happens, let's get you back on, I don't know, in like March or something. I think I have one open day left right now. It's in the end of March, regardless what happens. But first, best of luck to you next Tuesday. Thank you. It was an absolute privilege and an honor to have you on for a second time. Thanks for thinking of us and having, coming back on and chatting with us. Thanks so much, man.
My pleasure, Ben. Thanks so much. This is a great time.
Special thank you to our guest today, constitutional conservative, emphasis on constitutional, candidate for Wisconsin Supreme Court, Justice Daniel Kelly, for making himself available and coming on for a chat today. I will see you right back here next Tuesday when Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald and I will be back for our latest episode of Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fitzy. And then 2 days later on Thursday, February 23rd, Senator Romaine Quinn will be back for our now new, monthly chat, talking about all things going on in the legislature. So until then, for DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden, saying thank you for watching, and as always, have a blessed day.